Donal Hale today. I hope everybody can hear me. Please do shout or type in the chat if you've got any problems with sound or vision, anything, and we will get onto that for you. So thank you very, very much for spending your valuable time in the kind of final throes of the summer term to join us today. We are absolutely thrilled to have Donal Hale with us. I know that he needs no introduction, but I will do an introduction properly shortly. I'm also joined today by Helen and Hannah, who you can see at the top of the screen. These guys are some of our best coaches here at Sparx, and they're going to be moderating all of the chat and the questions today, surfacing some really helpful stuff that Donal will be able to answer. And I'm Kate, I'm the literacy advisor here at Sparx Reader. So if you do have questions to ask during our webinar today, we're going to ask you to sort of hold fire on typing them just in case Donal does actually get around to addressing them, which is probably highly likely because we're going to steam through loads and loads of content. So I'll kind of open the Q&A about sort of 2/3 of the way through the webinar today. And then obviously, please just go for it and type anything that we might have missed. And we will try and get around to answering as many questions as possible. So a little bit of sort of an overview of what today is going to look like. We're going to start off with some introductions, and then we're going to launch straight into the practicalities of Sparx Reader, how it works on the ground for staff, for pupils, and for parents, how to implement, sustain, keep it going throughout the course of the academic year. And then we'll have a few reflections, and then there'll be time for Q&A, and then a few little updates from me at the very end. So first of all, let me just introduce Donal. I know that you're all here because you've kind of read about him and you've probably followed him on Twitter and read his blogs. But in case you didn't know some other facts about him, he's been at Trinity Academy Leeds now since 2022. He's currently head of English and the Sparx Reader lead. And he is shortly about to join their SLT, which is a phenomenal achievement. They're extremely lucky to have you on SLT, Donal. He's a really prominent thinker in the world of English education. He's a veteran conference speaker. He's a really, really experienced blogger. And I think personally for me, what I just love about your writing is that it's so practical and it's so refreshing. And it's also just you're so generous with what you do share. And I saw only recently you've just put up loads of really interesting things that you're going to be doing as you move into having Key Stage 4 at TAL. So lots of booklets and brilliance there surfacing on Twitter. He's also, I honestly don't know how you have the time for this, but he's also writing a book on how to create an effective English department, which is going to be published by Bloomsbury. And when's that going to come out, Donal?
It's either late 2025 or early 2026.
Okay, great. And he's also, as if, you thought Donal couldn't get any less sleep, he's also dad to 2 little girls, which is case in point. He does have to shoot off really promptly at 4:15 today to go and get said children. So we're going to try and be extremely efficient with our time and get through to Q&A as quickly as we possibly can. So we know that lots of you have joined today because you are thinking about sort of relaunching Sparx Reader in September, and you want to kind of maybe freshen up that process. And we also know that some of you are new to Sparx Reader, so you want to have kind of get armed with some ideas ready for your first ever launch in September. So what I'm going to do is ask Donal about the sort of prepare and deliver phases of Sparx Reader using broadly the sort of EEF's implementation cycle, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But the wheel that you can see on the screen there sort of walks you through how to really effectively implement something in a school context. And what we're going to do is talk through teachers, students, and parents. So let's just get stuck straight in to the teachers. So Donal, to begin with, how did you familiarize your team with how Sparx Reader works?
So it was probably around this time last year, actually, when I was looking for a software that essentially created that accountability with regards to students' independent reading. So I did some research into different platforms. I got really interested by Sparx Reader because our school was really successful with Sparx Maths. So I just did the demo, really, and I became really familiar and au fait with how the system works, very much from a student's perspective. And then when I was ready to launch that to the teachers of my school, what I made really sure was that I knew all the ins and outs. I knew exactly how it worked, and I preempted all the questions that they were going to ask. So when I first launched it in the first meeting, I used the student demo to show what it looked like from a student-facing point of view. And then I put a list of 10 questions that I thought that they were going to ask me about the software, so that just kind of maximize the efficiency of that process of implementation, because I preempted, like we, I suppose, preempt misconceptions in a lesson, what they were going to ask about, and then I had the answers ready for that. And it also meant, in terms of buy-in for teachers as well, if they had any niggles or concerns about what we were doing or trying to achieve, I kind of was really clear with, well, I've thought about that already, but I'm going to address that. And then anything else that kind of became a concern was just mopped up quite quickly.
And were you doing that at this time last year with your teachers?
Yeah, it was July last year, and it was quite a quick turnaround for us. So, I mean, it was our last department meeting of the academic year last year, where, I mean, I've been kind of playing around with the software in the background. I always, when I kind of launch something with the team, I never kind of do a knee jerk. So like, I probably spent weeks, possibly a couple of months, really, really thinking about whether to actually even mention it to them. And then I signposted it and said, look, there's going to be more details to come in our first department meeting in September, but I want to give you a bit of a thinking time of the summer break to think, right, this is what's coming up. So I didn't expect them to have to like think too much about it in their summer holidays, but just so it didn't come as a mad surprise really in September. But I think I just took the view of, I just wanted to make sure I was the expert in it, and I kind of put myself forward as the Sparx Reader leader, just because I didn't want to introduce something and then delegate it to someone. I wanted to make sure that I kind of like took full control of that. And that just made it easier for the implementation, because I was so confident with it that when the team came and I, as I said, did that preemption really of questions or concerns, that they knew that I'd already thought about them before I went to them. It wasn't just kind of launching and going, oh, what do you think, guys? Or I didn't kind of do like a kind of consultative kind of leadership thing. It was very much, we are doing this and this is what we need to do. And here's the why, the rationale for that. Here's where your concerns are going to be. I preempted those. Anything else we can deal with. And that just made it simpler, because then the staff felt really confident that the decision was made for the right reasons, but also the person leading that had a real sense of ownership and was in charge of it. And it made their lives easier to know that, you know, you had someone really kind of taking hold of it.
Can you give us a sense of what some of the concerns that you had preempted were? Had you accurately preempted them? What were they, and how did you preempt them?
Yeah, the first one, and I think this is always the preemption I have when people reach out to me online as well. It's like, is it going to boost reading for pleasure? And it's a really interesting one with Sparx Reader, and I kind of made this really clear in a case study that I did for Sparx Reader as well, available on the website, that I don't really think that this is the tool to kind of, as a first starting point, to boost reading for pleasure. It's about that kind of careful, independent, accurate reading on a weekly basis. So I knew the team were going to say things like, well, what if, you know, they're reading on a screen and then they're reading, they enjoy it, they have to stop and answer questions. What's that going to do for reading for pleasure? So I preempted that immediately and said, I don't care, because that's not the purpose of this. The initiative that we launched was about making sure it was accountability of independent, careful, meaningful reading. And actually, once we kind of got over that barrier quite quickly, it was quite simple to kind of look at what the next steps were going to be, because I think that's always the misconception with reading programs. There is a place for reading for pleasure. I'm not, as an English teacher, saying to you that I don't want my students to read for pleasure. We do so much for that, but this isn't the purpose of what we do Sparx Reader for. Is making sure that they are confident readers, is making sure that they can do that reading independently, regularly, so they're in really good learning habits. They can do that through their educational journey. But that was a real kind of like starting point, but it shut down the conversation quite quickly, because it's like, but we're not doing that. The second one that came up was more about the practicality of, well, they're reading on a screen and accessibility to devices. Now, I think this is probably going to be the number one question that comes up. How do you make sure students all have access to devices? And that depends on your school structures and your school context to a certain extent. To give you a bit of context, 60% of our students are in receipt of pupil premium. We operate in the third poorest ward in the country. So we really do serve the disadvantaged community of Leeds. We make sure that they have those devices. So I remember when we launched Sparx Maths in year one, before we launched Sparx Reader a little bit later down the line, that we did whatever we could to make sure they had device access at home. And when that wasn't possible, they had device access in school. But as soon as you assume that, oh, well, they can't access it because of logistics, therefore they're not going to complete it, you've already lost the battle. You're not going to get your high completion rates, because you're already essentially saying to the students, well, you're going to have a ready-made excuse, or you're saying to the parents, and we'll come to parents a bit later, there's a ready-made excuse. Now, My view is you need to kind of utilize school funding for that, and that's not always possible. Budgets are tight, but to me, it's one of the most important ways in which you can use your pupil premium that you receive. So if you're speaking to senior members of your team, or indeed you're a senior leader, it's thinking really carefully about your budget allocation to make sure that the accessibility is there. But I think the important thing with Sparx Reader, and the messaging is really important with this, it's any device. So it's not just, you know, a laptop or PC, they can do it on their phones. And we made that really clear to the students. And most schools will have done Sparx Reader off the back of Sparx Math. So actually the device issue is probably solved for you by the time you get to Sparx Reader anyway. So it shouldn't be the kind of like predominant concern, and it often is. But actually logistics like that are actually quite easy to solve, I think, but it's often the number one reason why people don't even try. And we took the view of, we're going to make sure everyone gets 100%. That's going to be our starting point. Anything less than that. But to get 100% completion, you need 100% accessibility. So you need to work with your senior leadership team. You need to make sure that they've got that. You need to work with parents. But you also need to accept, and again, apologies for being blunt with this, that sometimes your students and sometimes your parents are going to lie to you. They're going to say, oh, well, we couldn't access it. We didn't have the internet. It's like, well, you have to work around that. You know, if our community of students who come from really deprived backgrounds have managed to get, 100% completion rates, or we're averaging kind of 98.7% completion rates in our community, it can be done. But I think the staff mentality, the psychology behind that often becomes the barrier, and you need to break that down really, really quickly. Because as soon as you start putting in the reasons why they can't do it, that becomes the mindset. The mindset needs to be the reasons why they are going to do it, and make that inevitable.
Is that something that you experienced quite a lot at first? And how did you support your staff in those initial kind of rollout weeks where it was very unfamiliar?
As I said, because we had Sparx Math as our mental model, that helped with that to a certain extent. But to be honest, those concerns were sort of allayed by that first meeting that we had officially in September, because what I promised the team was that that won't be your barrier. So when they're kind of chasing our students to make sure completion rate's done, when they're in conversation and dialogue, I said to them, I never, ever, ever want you to have a conversation about accessibility. Leave that with me. I can solve that. I can use my pastoral team. I can use my senior leadership team to solve that. But once it becomes that, what happens is that inefficiency within school time, where a student says, oh, I couldn't access at home, when they possibly could have done, but they're just saying that, and they know, and often when they say that, they're going to get out of it in terms of completion of home learning. That if they said to a member of staff, they're going to have to go and find a member of staff to speak to a member of staff who speaks to a member of staff, and kind of students kind of exploit that chain of communication almost. So what we made really clear to the students, and we launched this with kind of whole school assembly launches, whole year group launches, to make sure that those were kind of preempted with the students. So like I did with the staff, where I kind of did like these are going to be your concerns, we did that with the students. So we said, right, we're launching this, and this is what it is, and this is why we think it's really important. Now, these are, and we had a top 5 rather than top 10. These are the top 5 reasons why you think you might not be able to complete it. And then we did ... a use of ellipsis, but this is why you're wrong. And we made it really clear why that wasn't going to be a barrier. We put the systems in place to make sure it wasn't a barrier. So from day one, they were really au fait with the idea that, oh, well, actually, I just need to get it done. And it's sometimes about making sure that those kind of expectations of students are really, really high. And it's also about being brutally honest with the cohort of students you've got in your schools. There will be some students on occasion who do lose accessibility temporarily. But my view is, if I'm setting, home learning in terms of reading, I'm setting 300 Sparx Reader points per week. So roughly equating to 30 minutes of careful reading per week. And I'm giving them, 7 days to do that. It's a reasonable expectation that they can get that done. And if an issue arises, that they come to you and you can solve that with this school. And schools are very good at solving those problems. I mean, I think back to COVID, look at what we did with live lessons. Look at how we had to just suddenly manage in a pandemic students' accessibility devices. We were able to do that. And it'll be few and far between. And what you will find is with your students is they will tell you on deadline day, oh, I couldn't access it. You should be sanctioning them if that's your policy for non-completion of home learning, if they're saying that to you, because actually that's a bad learning habit. That's them waiting till deadline day when they've had a week to complete it. So the best thing to do is to make sure that you make success inevitable. You take away the barriers, yes, you make it sure that they can actually do it, but you also don't kind of buy into the excuse culture that students as teenagers, we've all been there, are going to try to exploit, because they're not going to want to all do this. Some do and some absolutely love it. We've got a student in year 7 who's on, I think it's now 327,000 Sparx Reader points from this year alone. Like, he's obsessed with it. He does it for 90 minutes every day, 7 days a week. But not every student's going to be that. There's going to be some who are reluctant, but it's about making sure they're pulled through. With care and support, it's, I love you. I want to make sure that you can be really successful. And the way I show you that is to make sure that you don't get away with it, or you don't sit that rebuild, that detention, whatever your school calls it, that you are held accountable for this.
I can see we've actually got a question there about kind of sanctioning. This might be quite a good time to sort of possibly dip into that. Although I do want to just flip back quickly to a question about teachers afterwards. But what do you do, if a student isn't on 100% completion? And I know you give the pupils tons and tons of reminders. Is it almost every day you remind them?
Yeah, every single day. So what we do in terms of our strategy of over communication is that we've got lineups, and obviously not every school will have lineups. So whatever works as the vehicle within your school. But every day, every morning, they're given their Sparx Reader deadline reminder every single day. I create a graphic that I share, and you'll see it online on Twitter when I kind of share this stuff. If you want to see an example of it, the completion rates that have been done every day from the Monday deadline that we set to the following Monday, to make sure we're keeping track every day. Every break and lunchtime, the head of the year mentions the Sparx Reader kind of completion date. Line up at the end of the day, we mention it. And every single day in every single English lesson, after we follow our kind of starter activity, we do kind of 6 recall questions, or recall 6 to begin our lessons. And we'll flash up on the screen for each individual class who's completed and who's not completed, and their percentages. And we kind of just do that very public facing messaging to make sure they're reminded. So no students will go through more than a couple of hours at TAL where they're not reminded to complete Sparx Reader. And that's every single day. And what we do towards the end of the week with regards to parents communication, we don't do it every single day because that might be overkill for the parents and they get a bit annoyed. But 3 days before the deadline, or 4 days, depending on when it falls, we start to send a daily text message of any student who has not yet gone beyond 0%. So if they're on even, 0 by, say, Thursday, and they need to get it done by Monday, they'll get a text message home. And we just automate that with our Bromcom system to make sure that happens. And we ask our heads of year to do that. And then if they don't get it done that night, the message will come again on Friday, it'll come again on Monday. So it's just that constant communication. So by the time they get to Monday's deadline of 7 p.m. for us, there's just no excuse. And the students who don't complete it, so to put it in context, to be brutally honest with you, we had 4 students today in year 7 who didn't complete it. We had a 98% completion rate. And they did set a rebuild today. That was a 1-hour detention after school, where we catch them up with Sparx Reader, but we also speak to them about the importance of Sparx Reader. We've only had 2 repeat offenders in year 7 who have done it. Sometimes it just happens periodically where students don't complete, but we kind of get between 2 to 4 students who don't complete every week in year 7. But yeah, we're quite unashamed about, well, that's a home learning expectation. So we set a 1-hour detention after school to make sure they're caught up with that, and we kind of make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm just going to quickly ask you one last question about the kind of your responsibilities as a reader lead. You've kind of already gone through, obviously you are kind of orchestrating these reminders, and presumably you did the assemblies, but do you think you could just give us a really quick rundown of what you do, your kind of reader admin is on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and a termly basis? What are your main kind of to-dos for reader?
So for me, and you don't have to do this necessarily, but I just do. I think that's probably the reason why we've been so successful. So daily, what we do each day is I log into Sparx Reader. I do a screenshot of all our classes and look at their completion rates. Obviously, those highlighted in gray are the ones who have not yet completed. I then pull together a list each day for the English team. So at the beginning, I pulled together a list myself independently of every team. So we've got 10 classes in year 7, 10 classes in year 8 to use Sparx Reader, for example. I did a screenshot of every single one, and I emailed every night to our team and said, you're going to put this up on your screen after your recall activity at the end of the lesson. But over time, to kind of reduce the admin, because that was a lot for me as an individual, I just asked the team to do that. But I set the mental model, so I did it. So like whenever I do anything with my team, they do it because they know that I would absolutely do it. So like I never tell them to do anything I'm not willing to do myself. And actually I was doing it kind of as a multiple of 10 or a multiple of 20 at one point with classes. So I asked them to do it for the 1, maybe 2 classes that they teach. Weekly then, what I do is I update my graphics. So again, if you go onto my Twitter, you'll see examples of this. I know some of the people in the questions are asking, can you share those assembly slides? You'll see them on Twitter if you follow me. Essentially, each week when we get to deadline day, I put a overall percentage of each year group, hopefully 100%, but often kind of maybe 98, 99%. I then also have a class breakdown of which class got 100% and which class didn't. And the heads of year feed that back to each of their classes to make sure that they're really aware of that. And then termly, what I do is I review who are our repeat offenders if we have them. We haven't had many, to be honest, but my goal was always, well, if I've got a student who's maybe been in 3 detentions in a term, well, something's gone wrong there. And actually, my duty is to make sure that I've removed that barrier. Because if they've not done it 3 times after everything we do, there's something fundamentally wrong there. They need extra support. We've not had to use that, but that's kind of my kind of feel safe of making sure that I'm not just then kind of, punishing a student because of maybe their home circumstance. Actually, something's wrong there. But that isn't then me saying, okay, they don't have to do Sparx Reader. It's right. I'm going to make sure that they're taken out of this English lesson to complete Sparx Reader, or they're going to stay for a compulsory kind of session as a support one day after school to make sure they're successful for that deadline. So yeah, that's the kind of admin side of it. You can kind of make the admin as much as you do. What I do each day though with the team, and what I ask the team to do, every time they see a class in the corridor, as they kind of walk down our corridors, they remind them, Sparx Reader deadline Monday, 7 p.m., Sparx Reader Monday, 7 p.m., Sparx Reader. It's just a daily conversation for us. I mean, even our chef will, when they line up as their food, will say, have you completed Sparx Reader yet?
And are they sort of getting Sparx Maths as well in parallel?
Yeah,
cool conversation.
It's what we did with Sparx Math in year 1 before we had Sparx Reader, so we kind of utilized that. But it's just about making sure that it's high profile. It's just making sure the students hear it all the time, also from as many people as possible. When the students leave site, we'll have our math team, our science team, our humanities team all saying Sparx Reader Monday, 7 p.m. Everyone's aware of it. Everyone's saying it all the time. And we just nag them to get it done, which sounds a bit kind of reductive, really, but I think it's important that you need to kind of give them those reminders.
Over communicate for sure.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, I think it's really important.
Donal, we've got a question that's quite relevant there about how long does this admin take you? Obviously, to begin with, it was taking you a really long time, but is that kind of stripped back now?
On a daily basis, the admin takes me 10 minutes.
Okay. On
a daily basis. On a weekly basis, to create those graphics, because I've got them all set up on Canva now, and often because I can just replicate. Again, it's investment at the beginning. That used to take me, say, 30 minutes once a week. I've got that down to, last time was a bit longer because we had a couple of year rates who were a bit unusual in their completion rate, so I had to just follow up. But you're looking at 10 to 15 minutes. So it's not as much as it kind of first appears. With any system, takes time to begin with, but then when it embeds and flows, it's great. And then, of course, once you've done that, you can begin to delegate. So, for example, next year, I'm probably going to delegate that to another member of staff to do, or we're going to collaboratively do that to kind of share the workload. So, with this stuff, it's about making sure that it's manageable. But I think you need to invest in it. But it's like what we say all the time at TAL. It's like if you invest in the small stuff now and get it right and it's set up, then actually things start to look after themselves, really. So yeah, there is a bit of admin, but I would say 10 minutes, maybe daily max. Some days it's 5 minutes. It can be sometimes it's a text message to my WhatsApp group. Sometimes it's just a quick email to my department. 15 minutes max, I would say, on a weekly basis for the graphics.
It sounds to me like there was a lot of heavy lifting at the start, getting the heads of year, SLT, kind of so many different stakeholders bought in that now kind of communicating that message is pretty seamless. Just making sure that so many people are aware of what needs to be said to the pupils.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think, as an English department or as a Sparx Reader leader, if that's your role, you can't operate alone. You need to kind of use the teamship of your organization. And that does take time. And I'm lucky in terms of, my staff really valued like why we were doing this, but I launched to staff as well who weren't involved in the kind of like logistical side. So I run all of this. I don't ask my science teachers to do any admin, for Sparx Reader. I need to present to them and make sure why we're doing that. So that if students speak to them, break at lunchtime, they kind of know and they can reinforce that message. And it's just a simple one of, Sparx Reader is really important because that careful reading that you do each week is going to set you up for success at GCSE. Just a stock phrase, a stock line, almost a script to follow is really powerful. But and again, the thing that's going to preempt, I'm going to try to preempt a question that's going to come up is, well, what if staff don't want to buy in? I can't solve that for you. That's sort of the health of your organization, but that's sort of your role as the Sparx Reader leader or whatever position that you're in, is to make sure that buy-in occurs. I think the way to do it is to kind of sell it in terms of why you're doing it. It's about the impact. Say to your other departments that, the average reading age of the GCSE papers across all subjects is 16 years old, and our students aren't currently at that reading level. So you may be a math teacher, but they're not going to get the math grades you want them to get because they can't decode or read or infer or comprehend the word-based problems. So I'm helping you with that. And it's about being blunt sometimes with staff. We have a responsibility and moral duty to make sure that, we've got effective readers and skills. So it's about making sure that you have your SLT support, or if you're an SLT, really hammering that message so that all staff really do believe in that. And it's not about kind of beating them over the head with it. It's about really genuinely trying to get them to think about, well, actually, why it's important for the students. But if you can also kind of show them how it benefits them, then, all the better in terms of their messaging as well.
So so moving on to the pupils, is that what you communicate to them as well when you launch Sparx Reader in your assembly? You talk to them a lot about not just this is your homework, but actually this is how it will benefit you for the rest of your lives?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, so as you may have gathered, I can be quite blunt, so I don't kind of do fluffy things. So I said to the students in my opening assembly, we're going to be launching Sparx Reader, and the purpose of Sparx Reader is to ensure that you can do meaningful, independent, and careful, accurate reading each week. You may or you may not love this, but this is one of the most important fundamental life skills you need to possess to be successful. And we kind of went with that angle of, I'm not expecting you to love it, because, and I get frustrated with this as an English teacher all the time, where it's like, reading for pleasure becomes like kind of like, the bastion of like an English department where we're given this added pressure. Whereas I don't get any maths curriculum leaders having to say, oh, well, we teach math for pleasure, we do science for pleasure. Pleasure's great, and there's other initiatives you can use for pleasure, but it's about being honest with the students and say, look, you're preparing for exams whereby independently you need to be able to read unfamiliar text. Think about the GCSE English language papers, for example. I mean, you can question whether it's a valid qualification or not, but the reality is they exist. They need that support. If you have that habit from year 7 all the way to year 11 where they're doing that regularly, it's going to benefit them. And that's what we say to the students. We say, look, in year 7, you might not recognize the importance of that. In year 11, you're going to thank us. You're not going to believe your luck when you get to that paper and you find that easy and you're going to get successful grades to do whatever you want to do. And it's about making sure that message is really, really tight, but also, again, as blunt as you want it to be. Don't make this out to be like some kind of fluffy thing. Don't make it out to be like, oh my God, you're all going to love it. And by the way, some students absolutely do. So I never intended students to come up to me and say, I love Sparx Reader. It's changed me in terms of my reading habits, and I love reading. And students do it all the time. They absolutely approach me now and say, I never read in primary school. I'm forced to read now. And actually, because I've been forced to read, I now love to read. I'm like, great. And I don't like it warms my heart, yes, but equally I'm thinking, but that's a helpful byproduct, but it's not the goal. It's still never the goal.
So just talking about how you kind of began in September you started just with year 7, didn't you?
Yes.
How did you kind of practically familiarize your pupils with Sparx Reader? Did you just send them away to go and do it, or did you give them a more structured introduction?
No. So I kind of take the Rosenshine principle about kind of like enabling high success rates. So we did, in terms of our launch, 2 things I recommend all schools to do. So we did it across 2 weeks in terms of our launch. So week 1 in the English lessons, we took them to an ICT room, or we give them a laptop in the classroom, whatever your system is in school of how you do that. But they need computer access ultimately, or device access. Chances are your schools have banned mobile phones, which is good. So hopefully it is in an IT room or with laptops. So week 1, what we did was we showed them. We went into the student demo. I did the same thing I did with the staff. I showed them what it looked like from the student user interface, so they were really familiar with it. And then we got them set up the following week into the Sparx Reader test, and then we kept them, and they began to use the homework. So we set the homework immediately after they completed the Sparx Reader test, so they could go into the software straight away, use it. And then we brought them back again to a computer room for the first week of homework to make sure that they all did it. And in our first week for year 7, they got 100%. Now we created that, we artificially constructed that, because they didn't do their first week at home independently. They did it at school. And we did that deliberately to show them, right, you can all do it. There's your mental model, you can do it. And then the following week, they went to independence. And that was hard for us because we then had constructs we couldn't control. and other factors and context that, meant that they didn't get 100%. They dropped to 93% in the week that they worked independently. Now, to put that in context, that's the lowest we've ever had for that year group, 93%. And then it became, right, we've got 7% of students who can't do this independently at home or chose not to. Let's target those 7% of students. That was, in our context, 20 students out of 240. And we target them. For some, it was just a conversation. Next week, that's going to be a detention if you don't do that. That solved the problem. For some people, it was an issue with home. We solved that problem. The following week, then, we got 99.5%. We got one student incompleted, and that's because that chose not to complete it, and they started detention. We let the year group know one student completed. They will be sitting in that detention, and then our success rates have been high ever since. Students are kids. They will occasionally forget. It happens. But if you make success inevitable to begin with and set that mental model of your expectations easier, if you just send them off and say, go and do this, you'll au fait with technology, because they're not as au fait with technology as you think. They're really not. They need that guided, explicit instruction of how it's done, and then show them that they can do it. And then how powerful is that to say, well, you've already got 100% in week one. Let's maintain that. As opposed to kind of, if you do a week one launch and you're getting 30% and you're trying to build that up to 100 over time, you've already got students. Chances are that 70% weren't sanctioned, or there's no accountability, or there's no follow-up that you could do because there was too many of them, and then you're chasing your tail. We did that deliberately so we could specifically target those who need extra support. And it's been really powerful for us to do that, and really important, I think.
So on that note, so obviously there are some students who genuinely probably have struggled, as opposed to some students who maybe struggle to access, or they just haven't done it. But we've got a few questions in the chat about how do you support the students who have low accuracy, or who genuinely do struggle with reading. Do you have something separate to your kind of detention structure for those pupils?
So for some of our students we've got students who are, with a chronological age that, might be 11 when they join us, but they've got a reading age of 5, And for some students like that, we make exemptions from Sparx Reader until we catch them up with our reading interventions. The good thing about Sparx Reader, of course, is that, it's a responsive, adaptive piece of software. So obviously the books that are generated for their library is meant to match their reading level based on the reading test that they do. And that helps a lot of it. For some students, we pull them out of Sparx Reader until we use our intervention to catch up, and then we bring them back into Sparx Reader when we feel they're ready. If it's like, and not every context will have this, but we have students genuinely who can't read. And I don't mean they can't read well. I mean, genuinely they can't decode. They can't decode CBC words. So until they can do that, I'm not going to give them Sparx Reader, but I'm also not going to say they don't do Sparx Reader ever. It's about making sure you catch up and close those gaps and then bring them in and have that graduated approach for that as well. I've also noticed a question there about, do we ask students to catch up to 100% if they missed a week? Yeah, what I really like about one of the new features of Sparx Reader, that on the right, when they log in, it says how many Sparx Reader points they need to catch up with any homework that they've missed. And we do that, yeah. So in the rebuild of the detention they do, we make sure they're caught up, because we take the view of, look, I'm going to have you for an hour after school. I'm going to get you caught up to make sure that success is inevitable, because I don't want to see you here again. This isn't about put them in a room and then just kind of keeping them in silence and just say, haha, I showed you. It's about, no, you're going to get Sparx Reader done, because that's the expectation. And also, if you believe in the benefits of Sparx Reader, you need to kind of make sure they get it done ultimately as well.
Donal, I know we're really pushed for time. There are just 2 questions in the chat that I think would be really helpful for people to know. A couple of people have asked whether you set Sparx Reader as the only English homework, or whether you kind of balance it with another English homework as well.
It's the only, so we've got knowledge organizers. So each subject has a knowledge organizer, and we ask for students to do 30 minutes of kind of revision through a self-quizzing model that we've taught them with their knowledge organizers for English. That's a whole school. But in terms of English, we just do Sparx Reader for year 7, 8, and 9. We don't do anything else. I think,
what will you do at Key Stage 4, which the school will have its first year 10 next year? Will they do Sparx Reader as well?
They're not going to do it this cohort for Key Stage 4 for us until we get it fully embedded with 7, 8s, and 9s completely. And then we're going to take a decision about Key Stage 4. If I'm being honest, we're probably likely to keep it within Key Stage 3. We've got a different homework model that we're doing, whole school structure, that works better for Key Stage 4. And we probably, at this point with our reading interventions have done enough to kind of support students with their literacy to make sure they access their GCSEs. So they probably don't need that. But it's not to say you can't do it for Key Stage 4. We may choose to do that in the future, but it's not our kind of short-term plan to do that.
I'm just going to ask you one more question, Donal. I know we've hit 4:15. Well, actually, we've had a really great question in the chat as well. Let's go to that one first, and then I will just ask a quick roundup. But we are literally in our last sort of 60 seconds. Madeline has asked, how do class teachers use the data from Sparx?
Yeah, so we use the data in terms of completion rates. The data is quite straightforward. It's just making sure that, you don't get your repeat offenders. In terms of the data that's available, obviously they're given their Sparx level. They're given things like like word speed and things like that. What we do is we actually triangulate kind of the Sparx Reader data that we receive with NGRT to kind of triangulate together, just to kind of have a fail-safe metric to make sure that the reading age is improving. The only kind of data set that I ask class teachers to look at is the accuracy. Because what was really interesting for us is that we had teams, even kind of high prioritizing teams, who had really low accuracy, like low and very low, when they were doing Sparx Reader, because frankly, they were lazy. They were just trying to game the system of Sparx Reader. They were just kind of like, I'm not going to read the paragraph. I'll scroll down, answer the questions. I'll probably get it right because I'm clever. And they didn't.
Did you use the timeline, the kind of activity timeline to cross?
Yeah. So we use that, and then what we looked at what I asked class teachers to do is look at your students who began with very low, and then work out how quickly it got them to excellent in terms of accuracy. Because what I said was, if you're a high prioritizer, you should be excellent of accuracy. There's no reason why you're not. It's just absolutely no excuse not to be. And then where students, for example, didn't get to excellent by a certain period of time, then we had a conversation with them whereby we pulled them out of a break at lunchtime, and we actually asked them to do Sparx Reader in front of us, and we watched how they did it. And we realized the reason why you're actually as low is not because you can't read and you don't know the answer to that question. You're just not doing it properly. You're scrolling, you're clicking, you're hoping to game the system. It's not going to work. And just so you know, if your accuracy isn't 90% by X date, we're going to give you the detention, and that's not the problem.
Thank you. That's so practical, so helpful. If I may ask you one final really quick question. What do you think is the most important thing to get right when you are implementing Sparx Reader?
It's more than one thing. I'll give you three things. So the first thing is, as I mentioned at the beginning, understanding that it's not about making students love reading. You have to do other things aside from that with Sparx Reader. That's the first thing. It's about careful reading. It's about independent reading. It's about accurate reading. The second thing is that you need really high completion rates at the beginning. So you've got a high starting point that you may drop from, but the higher it is, the lower the drop ultimately. And the third thing is making sure that both staff and students understand what you're trying to do in really practical, almost outcome-focused terms. So this is going to help you be successful in all your GCSEs, because you're going to be reading unfamiliar text with a high reading age, and you've not done that independently yet. You need to practice. In the same way Cristiano Ronaldo, practice that free kick style over and over again to become the expert. That's what you need to do with reading. And again, using that kind of metaphor or analogy is quite useful to them, because again, they'll say to you things like, oh, I don't want to do Sparx Reader. I don't like doing Sparx Reader. I don't care. Because a professional footballer probably doesn't like having to take 30 penalty kicks in a row over and over again. A basketball player doesn't like to do 30 free throw shots over and over and over again. They do it, and it's that drill mentality, and we try to train our students with that. You don't have to love it, but you have to do it to be successful. So yeah, those would be the three.
Oh, that's so helpful. I know you have to rush off, but Donal, thank you. And on behalf of everyone who's come and all of the team here at Sparx, thank you so much for your time. And I really encourage anyone who wants to kind of learn more about this to click at the green banner at the top, and it will take you through to the full kind of rundown of what Trinity is doing when it comes to Sparx Reader. But Donal, thank you so much. We will let you shoot off now. And anyone that is still on the call, I'm going to just very quickly flick back to my screen. Oh, it doesn't seem to be working. Okay, never mind.
Okay, I've just popped my Twitter handle on there. So if I didn't get a chance to answer any questions, just message me.
Thank you.
All the thing I'd say is please don't DM, because often it doesn't pop up on my phone and I just miss them. So just at me and then send a message and I'll respond when I can.
Perfect. Thank you
you.
so much. So the last things from me, I'm just going to wrap up very quickly, everybody, is on the screen there, you can see some screenshots of what the case study looks like on our website. You can click through and it's a kind of a full rundown of everything they do, from the sort of assemblies to maintaining engagements, and some really hearts and mind stuff about reading in their community. And there are just two really quick updates from me. You might already be fully aware of this, but over the course of the last few weeks, Tim, my colleague, has been running some webinars on the impact of Sparx Reader. You might have seen the banner in the product as well. Just some really phenomenal results on what Sparx Reader is doing for our pupils, reading ages, particularly our disadvantaged pupils. I think we've seen some really, really striking gains in terms of their kind of perseverance and ability. So that's one thing to keep your eye out for. And finally, we have sent you all an email regarding this, but over the summer, we're going to keep students can earn points throughout the entire summer as they are reading. So please do encourage them to just keep dipping in and out of their books and doing some reading. As we know, reading ages tend to take a bit of a dip over the summer. And we will actually give some schools and pupils some awards. So the top 25 pupils and the top 5 schools will get some really lovely prizes will come their way in September, after we've kind of totaled up the amount of SRP earned over the summer. So please do check back at that email and it will give you all of the details. So that's everything from us. Thank you so much for joining. There is going to be a recording of this webinar on our support centre for you to sort of dip back into. I'm sure there's loads of stuff that Donal said that you're probably very desperate to kind of put into action in your own schools. And what I will do in a minute as the webinar ends is I'll just really quickly put up a survey and be really grateful if you could answer it for us. It's sorry, I'm just going to put it up now. It should take you just 2 minutes, and we'll be very grateful for your votes. Thank you so much, everybody.